people who grew up with Doomsday Prepper parents, what was it like? Story 1. I learned how to hunt when I was 6. For my 11th birthday, I learned how to make a bow and arrow with the contents of my hiking kit and caught a rabbit for lunch. I was then shown how to use said rabbit's bones and internal organs to fish, and we had trout and perch for dinner. My dad is of the mind that Doomsday Preppers who just stockpile food are idiots, because even if they survive the apocalypse, all they're doing is turning themselves into particular fat swines for the inevitable bandits to look for. Better to be able to hunt and gather food. My Doomsday kit is just a bug-out bag in my walk-in pantry. Story 2. This makes me think of the mother of a friend of mine. She had a small room off the side of the kitchen, shelves filled floor to ceiling with tins. It wasn't about doomsday. She had starved as a child in Holland during World War II, aged around 5. She didn't do any other prepping. I don't believe she thought it would happen again. She was a smart, capable woman living a continent away from Holland by the time I met her. I suspect the tins were a psychological safety net, a way of soothing childhood trauma. Story 3. I'm a bit of a prepper myself, but just to the extent of having a 2-month food and a 1-month water supply. I live in Manila, and the idea of an 8 earthquake that wrecks the infrastructure of a metropolitan area with 13 million people is the stuff of nightmares. Story 4. Bottles and bottles and bottles of water in the garage. My mom bought the bulk packages from Costco and stuffed them there. I wouldn't be surprised if there were over 100 plastic containers in there, though the world's gonna end panic mentality mostly comes from my mom's side, and it usually happens in waves. Things will be chill for a while, and the all-of-the-sudden packages with no electricity hand-crank radios and portable generators will show up at our door. She claims that she makes ambient purchases while half asleep, but I think she really just that paranoid. A few times, she's mentioned buying a cow for its milk. In case we're forced to live off the land or whatever, so we can still have milk, and after explaining to her that no, we absolutely do not have the room or faculties to take care of a whole cow, she starts up with the same line of questioning, but asking if we can get a goat instead. We don't even have a front or backyard. Story 5. We were always too poor to fully prepare for the end times, although my mom still believes they are coming. Fun fact, if you don't have food storage of your own, create a map of all the Mormons in your town so when goes down you can take theirs. This was actual advice from my mother. She grew up in Utah, and it's a well-known fact that Mormons are supposed to hold on to 7 years of food storage at all times in case of Jesus. It was also a plot point in an S.M. Sterling post-apocalyptic novel that a group of people stumbled across an abandoned Mormon house which set them up nicely for food for a bit. So yeah, make a Mormon friend for the end times. Story 6. My dad stocked textiles, toiletries, non-perishables, and water to an extreme amount. Our entire basement was basically a bunker. It could be locked from the inside at both the top and the bottom of the stairs, and we had huge drums of potable water that probably stood to about stomach high on me now as an adult. We also kept old 2-liter bottles, old Pepsi bottles for non-potable that we stacked like wine on heavy shelves, as well as rice and dried beans in vacuum-sealed containers. He was constantly buying things at old surplus outlets, gas masks, iodide tablets, rucksacks, etc., and taught us how to make bullets using a shell cleaner and powder packer. Like that one poster above mentioned, we also typically had about every few weeks a few days where we ate next to nothing, and were taught a lot of both local and non-local plants that could be edible clover, acorns, dandelion, etc., and how to prepare them, as well as things that could be health-beneficial clover, cherry bark, mullein, etc., and how to prepare them. We rarely got to go hunting because of where we lived at the time, but he did teach us how to set various snares and traps, like figure 4s and pitfalls, and any time one of our traps succeeded, he would use it as an opportunity to teach us how to clean and prepare meat not just for that day, but how to cut and dry it for future use. I have to say, knowing how to brain tan a rabbit skin is not something I ever expected to come up in conversation as an adult as much as it actually does. Story 7. Oh hey, one I can actually contribute to. My dad is a doomsday prepper. My whole life as a kid, he spent his spare time preparing for the inevitable collapse of the United States due to corruption, red-blooded religious Republican. Every Christmas, Dad would ask for freeze-dried food, knives, ammo, DIY manuals, and other stuff. He would spend his spare time with us as kids going to second-hand thrift stores to see what cool things we could find and fix up, the whole time talking about current events and politics and conspiracy theories. My dad taught me everything I know. How to fix computers, how to keep a clamp on my internet privacy, how to handle firearms safely, how to keep a level head in a crisis, how to plan ahead, how to vet my sources for bad information, to never trust anyone in a position of power, how to camp and find food and shelter. The apocalypse still hasn't happened yet, but it brought me a lot of comfort and it really grew a strong bond with my father. He never wrote me off for being a girl. He taught me the exact same skills he taught my younger brothers. He never treated me like I was a lesser person. When all the other men I knew in our rural town didn't give me a second glance, my dad taught me how to force them to look my way and acknowledge I was just as tough and competent as they were. In some cases, even more so, it was empowerment that I just wouldn't have had otherwise in rural Utah. My dad and I were, and still are, very close. We don't share the same viewpoint anymore. I can't talk politics or ecology with him anymore. He still thinks that global warming is fake and that immigrants are all illegals but mostly good people escaping bad governments and that the government is going to switch to fascism and martial law any day now. He still hoards old junk on the promise that he'll fix it one day. It took Sandy Hook for him to realize that Alex Jones was a paranoid psychopath who profited off of lies he believed. It took me a long time to realize, but my dad was a prepper for one reason and one reason only: he loved us, and was terrified of the unthinkable happening to us. And when times were lean and cash was scarce, the freeze-dried food in the storeroom kept us fed, and the propane heaters kept us warm. He wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, no matter how far-fetched or mundane, we had our bases covered. But looking back, my father damaged himself by isolating himself in paranoia and constant anxiety. Yes, it taught me helpful skills that I still use every day despite the shocking lack of an apocalypse or martial law, and yes, it helped me bond with my dad. And yes, I still look forward to the new pocket knife we all get on Christmas, that I always keep in my back pocket, but part of me wishes he had just gotten therapy instead of getting guns and knives and dry food. Edit. Thank you for all the kind replies. I called my folks yesterday. Dad's doing just fine. Story 8. My parents aren't doomsday preppers by any stretch of the imagination, but we did live in an area where getting to the grocery store would be difficult if it snowed in. As such, we always had a pantry full of home canned stuff that we made together, and a huge vat of sauerkraut we make once a year when I go home for Christmas. Story 9. Dad wasn't a full-on doomsday prepper, but he was a paranoid schizophrenic. He had a stock of MREs that I had now and then. They weren't bad, also canned in Sureback when it came in cans, also learned a lot about stuff like maintaining salt after sweating. Dad used to have me lick a teaspoon of salt after our walks. Tons of flashlights and batteries in the house. I remember him teaching me how to use a gas mask just in case. We live in upstate New York, so you're not exactly a war zone. He had a generator just in case the power went out. Honestly, not a bad idea because he lived in a place where winter could get pretty hairy. I will say Y2K had him totally spooked. We used to joke that he was Bert from Tremors minus the guns. Story 10. My friend lost his when I brought up the fact that his stash was useless, because we live in an area that would become irradiated after the nuclear power plant's meltdown. Story 11. Mostly normal. My dad just showed me what to do just in case doomsday ever came, taught me how to camp survive, use camo, ration food, shoot guns, and other basic survival skills. He taught me it's always better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Story 12. It was pretty much the same as any other normal family, I assume. We just went bulk shopping every few months. The only strange-ish thing is that we'd have a week out of every month that we'd have to kind of fast. We could have a pack of raisins and a bottle of water every day, and that's all. Story 13. My father had crates full of non-perishable food, camping gear, gas cookers, you name it, he had it. He stored that in a bunker he built, which was really just a big Anderson shelter. Story 14. My mom hoards a ton of canned food everywhere in the house, along with random tools she's been told will be helpful, and so many paper towels and rolls of toilet paper. The guns are another thing. Everyone in my family is content to let her do her thing and spend thousands of dollars prepping. There are so many useless things that take up a ridiculous amount of space there, all while she complained that we had too much stuff and needed to get rid of our actual belongings to make more room. Everyone she knows gets printouts of the newsletters she signed up for with prophecies about the end times. When I was still living at home, she'd walk into the room at random times to give me hour-long lectures about the coming wars and end times and how sinners are responsible for it. It was really stressful, especially because I have anxiety, which I'm sure isn't because of growing up in a paranoid atmosphere at all, and I still have nightmares about apocalyptic scenarios. I forced myself to develop a more accepting view for my own sanity, which is essentially, there are too many options to prepare for all of them, and I don't know how much I want to survive in a post-apocalyptic world anyway, so I'm going to enjoy the time I have without stressing too much about what-ifs. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been really helpful for dealing with the paranoia that still pops up sometimes, and I really recommend it for anybody who grew up in that atmosphere and has anxiety stemming from it. Story 15. I was raised Mormon, so I personally have learned how to take care of myself and trust neighbors. ID hits the fan. I have some food saved, but the best system is to set up farms and try to have things like chickens to make more food. If the world goes under, your neighbors are very important. But I grew up with a stash of seeds in our food storage if help didn't come within the time it was out. Story 16. My family teases me for prepping, even though they've used my water supply when our water was cut and lamp torches when our electricity went out. There's a difference between rational and irrational prepping, folks. I still eat the cans of food I rotate. There is enough food for 2 weeks. Most of the time I use it for times I was too tired to do grocery shopping after work. Also had a smoke-grade face mask. It wasn't so crazy when the bushfires caused the air to be hazardous to breathe in across the country. Also, I know that some of the people at high risk of the bushfires could definitely benefit from a mobile ham radio or even crank radio. The telco providers had cut communication in those fire-affected areas. Knowing the right information, like if those bushfires are coming your way quick and to evacuate, or the ability to make a distress call, could have and will be useful AF. The only people I think are crazier than people who go overboard with prepping are the people who think nothing will ever go wrong. City people are the worst. My sister went on holiday with her friends to an island. A monsoon swiftly hit and they weren't able to leave the building, let alone fly off the island. They were warned by authorities to fill their bathtubs with water before it was cut. 6 grown adults forgot about it all. They went 3 days without water. Story 17. My mom Wassie's convinced that in the apocalypse toilet paper would be as good as currency. She has an entire room in her house that is filled from wall to wall, floor to ceiling with toilet paper, It's like a Costco aisle. We are forbidden to talk about it because she doesn't want to be killed over it. Keeps it in the down low. Growing up it didn't seem weird because it was normal, but now that I'm an adult and a mother myself, it seems so crazy to me. Story 18. The odds that you can survive doomsday regardless of how prepared you are, is almost zero. Doomsday happens. The cities go into chaos and looting, gangs form. Those gangs move into the country suburbs. The country suburbs have already banded together and we have ourselves a nice neighborhood and house-to-house war. Both groups have gone to ground during this process and have killed every deer, cat, chicken, dog, rabbit in an attempt to survive. It's a last man standing and your only hope is to survive long enough for planting season because it's impossible to hunt. Then there will be tribal war for as long as we can imagine while ruthless people try to set up their own ruling governments so they can be king. Prep all you want. I think I would rather die in the first wave. Story 19. Not the worst kind of doomsday prepper, but my dad was USAF during the Vietnam War and my childhood was at the tail end of the Cold War. To this day I think I have a better than average chance of surviving nuclear apocalypse. At least I have some ideas as to what to do, what not to do, etc. In the end, who am I kidding? Who would even want to survive that? But I'd be one of those poor saps that didn't die in the blast because middle of nowhere, no targets. I suppose I'd try at least. Story 20. My stepfather was once in the Russian military, very strange guy, in fear of nuclear fallout for some reason, but us as children didn't need to worry, because he had a single huge biohazard or radiation. IDF suit hung over the kids' be good stick in a bunker in a nearby mountain. Well, he'll really. Story 21. My uncle was a prepper. He taught me bushcraft as a fun hobby, never really imprinting the idea of prepping. My parents were fine with that. Now, almost 12 years later, I rediscovered that hobby. He taught me a lot about navigation, improvised first aid, the ethics of survival and firelighting. I'm not a prepper in any way whatsoever. I don't believe it is a sustainable way of emergency survival on the scale of populations. However, if I ever find myself without a working vehicle in the middle of nowhere, I have no reason to panic, with my skill set. Story 22. My folks have enough food for 3 months. Their motivation is not to prepare for a doomsday, but for a financial collapse. They took Cyprus as an example. There was money, but people couldn't withdraw and buy food. I'm planning to stock food for like 2 weeks. Who knows what can happen. I think we sometimes forget we're screwed if the supermarket doesn't have any stock, or a more realistic situation when I make stupid financial decisions. Story 23. I didn't realize at the time that my dad was a prepper. We lived in the mountains, about 30 minutes from the nearest small town one grocery store and over an hour from the nearest town with a Walmart. Our water was gravity fed to our house from a waterfall. We had a huge log home that was heated with a stove that was huge and half of it was an oven for baking. We had radiant floor heating in the late 90s. None of my friends even knew what that was. Our house had a lot of hidden areas. We actually had a meat locker. My dad was a big hunter and he would bring home the meat. We would pop a fake wall off the house, bring the meat down into the meat room to hang. We were set up to be fully self-sufficient in the lack of electricity. We built our house off of logs that we cut down on our property. We had a cellar filled with canned goods and always had some kind of meat in the freezer. Story 24. Mormon parents were instructed to have 7 years worth of food for when Jesus comes. The entire basement of our house was just food and water supplies. Literally stacks and piles of food and water bottles. All kinds of non-perishable goods, like freeze-dried foods. My dad also always used to say our neighbors have received the same warnings we have. If they come here looking for handouts, we're going to tell them to look elsewhere. Edit. I'm no longer Mormon. Story 25. It was so stupid. I still remember my dad was convinced that 2012 was going to happen, so he stacked up on peanut butter, toilet paper, and an absolute ton of water. My stepmother ended up divorcing with him. My dad wanted to have a bunker somewhere in his backyard too. Story 26. My dad was a prepper. We had a shed out back filled with gasoline, around 300 gallons worth. We also had tons of water and canned food, tools, one of everything. I remember doing generator drills several times a year to make sure it was in good shape. We each had a laminated instruction sheet on how to connect and unconnected the generator. It was all quite a chore, but I didn't grouse about it. Then one day a hurricane came. A hurricane like we'd never seen before. Power was out for about 2 weeks. But we had air conditioning and a working refrigerator because of the generator I connected at night in the driving rain. We ate well, cool and dry, thanks Dad. Story 27. I remember my ex-girlfriends had their basements full of food. They seemed pretty normal. Was this doomsday prep or just they got it free from government? It was canned food, boxed food, etc. soda. Story 28. It's exhausting. My parents have backed down on it, but my sister still tells me every day how the world is going to end and we'll be living in tribes until Christ comes again, and how I'm wasting my time with college. My brother-in-law will suggest going on trips, but she doesn't see the point when it's all going to end soon. If it was just being prepped for of the world, it wouldn't be so annoying, but the religious aspect makes super uncomfortable. Growing up in a fringe Mormon cult isn't fun. Story 29. Not so much doomsday prepper, but my mum didn't allow any school to have my fingerprint, my photo or weight height, fearing that someone or Russians, as she said, would hack into the school mainframe and steal my private information, therefore making me vulnerable and putting me in grave danger. Story 30. I know some old veterans who started a group called SHDF. It grew quickly and I joined online with no clue what it was. Stands for hits the fan. They prep for everything, but mainly for that day when that big evil government comes to enslave you. I left it immediately upon seeing what it was, and they were not friendly about it. The people that say, I would just hunt for my food, or grow my own, are forgetting that the animals would soon be hunted out of existence. And climate change makes it a lot harder to grow crops. You can't go to the store and buy seeds. You can't water your crops if there is no water available. Story 31. My parents have 2 years' worth of food sealed in airtight mylar bags, which are stored in dozens of plastic tubs. All kinds of pastas, beans, etc. that have a shelf life of over 30 years stored this way. They also have a huge 300-ish gallon water tank, hundreds of gallons of other bottled water, a huge assortment of antibiotics they sourced from Mexico, a well with an optional hand pump attachment in case of a long power outage, and a backup generator. All of this and much more is kept in a secret room hidden behind a bookshelf. You'd never know it was there. In other words, they could live completely off the grid for a long time. They've read many novels about huge potential crises, such as an EMP wiping out the power grid. That's what got them thinking about being prepared for such an event. They are normal, loving people, and I had a good childhood. Story 32. I wouldn't say my mom is a hardcore prepper, but she definitely makes big decisions based on her idea that apocalypse is always imminent. Lots of couponing, a cellar full of canned food and bottled water. She cans food at least twice a month, makes her own bread, and the entire kitchen was full of jugs of homemade wine for a few years. We learned a lot of basic survival skills, homesteading, etc. Everyone in the family got a bug-out bag for Christmas this year, with pocket knives, MREs, life straws, and various other survival tools. All in all, it was definitely more of a positive presence in our household, although it is scary to see her worked up about the Iran thing going on at the moment. Story 33. Honestly, better than I thought it would be in a lot of cases. There are still plenty of hoarders mentioned in this thread, but a lot of them are actually teaching their children survival skills and other skills. I personally think that teaching your children skills is a very good thing to do, so they can eventually learn to live by themselves. Story 34. My grandfather, who was not a prepper necessarily, was alive when France was invaded during World War II. While we never had mass surpluses of food, my uncle does recall him hoarding glass bottles of water under the staircase. This was because when the Germans invaded, a clean source of water was the first thing to go, as well as running water. Eventually the water was cleared out, but there were still a few left remaining after he passed away a few years ago. Story 35. They came to it after I grew up, but my mom got bored living in San Francisco, so she joined the neighborhood emergency response team to be ready for the big one. Those guys recommended getting an amateur radio license, ham radio. Then my dad got his. They are now active hams, and involved with the local CERT team where they are. No stockpiles, no water hoarding, just ready to help their neighbors crawl out from the rubble when that 10 quake hits California. Story 36. My dad wasn't a hardcore prepper, but he was prepared. We were almost entirely self-sufficient when I was in high school. We had a garden, canned foods for the winter, and raised and butchered our own beef. As a background, I grew up in rural Montana about an hour out of town, so we all have kind of a head start in surviving by ourselves. I think in my sophomore year of high school, we had enough non-perishables for maybe 2 years if we also hunted for food. We also had massive tanks of drinking water and were able to purify the water from the creeks around our house if needed. All of us know how to fish, aim a gun, and basically forage for berries, roots, etc. I took the extra step and learned to use a recurve bow. My peers thought we were a little strange, but most people who never think about the what-ifs do. All of this came in handy when last year we had a massive snowstorm that knocked out power for a week. Trees had fallen over the roads so no one could get in or out of town. But we lived very comfortably. We had heat that kept us warm and basically just cooked all of our meals on the wood stove. It was a great low-key simulation for if something truly bad did happen. Say what you will about preppers, some are definitely a little bit insane. But when hits the fan, a great deal of us will just kick into survival mode and make do. I'm glad I was raised the way I was. Story 37. You spend every day wanting to help them, watching them ruin their own lives with their own brain. They spend all their money on stupid, they lose all their friends, they gain new friends who call them every day telling them to by some other useless which these friends just happen to make a commission from. Eventually you can't even have a normal conversation with them anymore. They have their heads filled with some bullshit religion, and they are constantly loading cleaning some guns, while owning a bunch of dogs that they never give any attention to, so the dogs become neurotic and dangerous and have to be locked up and fed over a fence. The family doesn't want to come anywhere near them on holidays, and ultimately stops calling altogether. They get to the point where one of the sisters wants to have Thanksgiving dinner since they haven't done it proper in 10 years, and the only way they can feel they can do it is to lie to your parents and say they are taking a trip to another country, which makes the parents yell about how they are going to die in some country and won't be able to be buried proper, so they won't go to heaven. More religious retardation. And then you show up at Thanksgiving dinner and everyone is trying to have a great time, but the only conversation is what happened to mom and dad. So ultimately it's just as sad as if you had stayed home and watched Netflix, and when you reach 35 you finally decide I can't handle them anymore. They ruining my life, I have to cut them off. And your kids say we're a grandma and grandpa, and you just want to cry. We always kept a decent amount of food storage on us at any given time, about 2 years worth, usually. Honestly, I don't see anything wrong with it really. The stigma against preparing for the worst is so bad. I don't think there's a problem with it so long as you're not affecting other people around you or creating your own financial apocalypse. There are some nutsos that go way overboard, which is unfortunate. I've seen a lot in this thread. It really has long-term effects on people. I don't really think that planning ahead for the possible future is such a bad thing though. You want food storage, sure, go ahead. You want an underground bunker, fine by me, just don't ruin yourself financially to do so. You want to start raising livestock. Well, as long as you have the space, money, time and knowledge to do it properly. Knock yourself out. We can't very well predict the future, so if it's possible that we'll have a happily ever after, it's also possible that we'll descend into a dystopia. I personally believe things are going downhill and these preparations will be incredibly useful, but that's just me. Don't go nuts with it. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Folks, be smart. Don't give about the stigmas. You do you. Story 38. I'm not a doomsday prepper, but I am technically a prepper. My parents were sort of preppers, so I was always aware that we had plans for escaping a fire and what to do if there was a disaster, where we could meet up and how to get to places. Personally, I think to some extent everyone needs to be a prepper. Being prepared is not a pejorative. Story 39. Not mine, but this recently happened here in the Netherlands. Apparently a father with his 2 sons and 1 daughter sat in their basement for a long time. During that time the father harassed his children. His children tried to escape several times, but failed twice I believe. When one of his sons finally escaped he went to the nearest pub and asked for help. The police showed up and arrested the father. When the father was asked about it, he said he did it because he was waiting for doomsday to happen with his children. Story 40. My father was always scared of an economic collapse that would have been worse than the 2008 recession. He followed Drudge Report and other conspiracy websites very closely. He invested his savings in gold, non-perishable foods, guns, medicine, etc. If it wasn't an economic disaster he was worried about, then it was a natural disaster such as an earthquake. Growing up was rather stressful because he used to tell me what to do to ensure the safety of my mother and siblings if he died. I went to school with a fear of a sudden natural disaster in the back of my mind and thinking of routes that would take me back home the fastest. My grandfather also harbored a lot of those the economy is going to collapse fears as well. Every time he came to visit, my dad and him would just talk about various conspiracy theories that always ended with the economy collapsing and all breaking loose. I got a compound bow and used to shoot recreationally. My dad would comment how I could go hunt for food when society collapses. It wasn't as bad as some of the people in this thread, but one funny memory pops up in my head. There was a forecast of an earthquake and my father pulled me and my siblings from school for a few days. I got to play my Xbox so I didn't complain. I remember he and my mom went to the nearest Costco and dropped $2,000 worth of supplies. The earthquake didn't happen and my mom was very pissed at my dad. I absolutely destroyed at Halo Reach that weekend. My father moved my family in a very small secluded town up north a few years ago. Hell sometimes go on and on how safe we are up here if there's an economic collapse. Story 41. Not a son of a prepper, but possibly a future one. I've done countless amounts of research on different scenarios and made small booklets with all the info I need. Example, I made separate booklets for finding different camping locations within a close vicinity to natural water, hunting techniques, stealth and camouflage, different plant types, simple log and stone structures, weapon forging, water treatment, signaling, basic hand-to-hand combat, and a few others I have in my bag. Along with that, I have a map book with all types of useful information on geography. Also a gas canister which is labeled water so when traveling, I can have a clean water source and a multi-tool for eating canned food, cutting rope, cutting normal material, a screwdriver, and a pair of pliers. I also have a solar-powered flashlight too that can come in handy when traversing at night. I also have a custom strap to attach to my backpack for my katana. I know it sounds dumb, but I'm really good with swords. Long thing short, I'm basically over-prepared. Story 42. OMG, a thread for me. My dad when he died, had 1,500 rifles and shotguns and 500,000 rounds of ammo. He also had hundreds of knives, Swiss Army knives, Victronics, Gerber knives, etc., cases of MRE's Army freeze-dried meals, cases of bottled water, gasoline, and cases of random stuff to barter. Toothbrushes, hair clips, shoes, sweaters. He was, you might have guessed, OCD hoarding, and there were piles of things everywhere. As he got older and less stable the piles also did. Bottom layers had neatly stacked boxes and stuff on the top was teetering and always tumbling. The hallway was filled. There was a narrow walking path in it. We had a whole room with nothing but guns. My dad was convinced a few end-of-days scenarios would happen. Nuclear war, we had radiation suits and masks and iodine. Climate catastrophe, this was the 70s, late 80s, and scientists hadn't gotten traction on climate change but were seeing the trending changes in temperature, and a dictator taking power. It's been odd getting older and seeing much of what he was worried about come to pass. He hated computers because thought they'd make a surveillance state. Those cities would flood in the cycles of the Ice Age. He thought money would increasingly corrode politics and we would get leaders in power who only wanted to enrich themselves. His main focus wasn't exactly doomsday, though that was his endgame planning. Though there would be societal collapse of some kind and people would have to stick together. His vision looked a lot like some of the places in Walking Dead. He often said he wasn't good at building or repairing machinery, so he was planning to outfit and arm the populace in exchange for things he needed. Everything was a barter. There was a lot of time listening to conservative media. My dad was to the left of Limbaugh, reading National Review, watching McLaughlin Report. When I was about 10 he made me read Gulag Archipelago. I also read a lot of the Tom Brown Is That His Name survival guides. With info on making animal traps and building a fire, I was probably one of the few tweens that could field strip an AR-15. My life was a lot of being lectured to by an insane hoarder who thought the world would fall apart and that I wouldn't be ready for it. It didn't seem to really be purposeful, until this question. Story 43. Okay, so we had an actual bunker that was supplied with everything we needed. It had a .22 pistol, a hunting rifle with a scope that I knew how to shoot, water, food, and even a working TV in order to watch what's happening. But one time we were on a tornado watch 1 mile from us and then it turned out to be a tornado warning, so we went inside the bunker and it was dark down that, but we had glow sticks. Also we went down there about 3 times in my life. Story 44. My mom told me and my brother for our entire childhood that the end times were coming soon. We didn't think we'd ever grow old or get to have lives. And that made me contemplate suicide since my life was pretty unpleasant and it was going to end pretty soon anyways. I still get really overwhelmed and in a bad place anytime there's a lot of bad news, globally. Story 45. I grew up in a doomsday cult that believed that any day now the end was coming, and we would all be together on a paradise Earth. We were told to keep go bags in the event that we suddenly had to flee because the government was after us for our beliefs. We were shown videos of people hiding in basements telling their stories about how they kept loyal to God by telling LGBTQ that they were going to die or quitting their jobs to become window cleaners, barely making a living. We were encouraged not to go to college or university and learn a trade because doctors and artists weren't going to be needed in paradise when we're all immortal and need to repopulate the Earth. Every day was filled with paranoia, and you couldn't make a single decision without having to think about God would want. Was so hard growing up. They basically stole my childhood. Story 46. My parents weren't doomsday preppers, but they were preparedness-minded. Same with grandparents and other extended family. The 30s and 40s had a huge impact on my grandparents, and they passed down their experience to their children, who passed it on to their children. Power outages, extreme weather, tough economic times and the like were on their minds. They always had lots of long-term food storage. Our family of 4 could have gone 3 months without going to a grocery store. Everyone in the family who is able to has a garden. Most of the family knows how to shoot, hunt and fish. Tools and the knowledge to use are in abundance. Learning new skills and pursuing both higher formal and informal education is encouraged. Physical fitness isn't a hobby, it's a lifestyle. Working as a team, yet being a strong independent person is taught at a young age. Critical thinking skills are integral and long philosophical, political, theological, historical and scientific debates are the norm at our dinner tables. I feel as if it's made me into a highly resilient, capable person. I'm no lone wolf though. I ask advice, critiques and opinions of others all the time. As Clint Eastwood says, a man's got to know his limitations.